Hi, I'm Ken Hackshaw, and welcome to another installment of Risk Unfiltered. I would like to introduce Sara-Jade Govia to our Risk Unfiltered. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you, Ken, for having me. I'm finally here.
Well, thank you. You're finally here. So as is customary when we meet with subject matter experts, so folks like yourself coming out of a specific industry, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, I am Sara-Jade Govia, and I am the president of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. And it's in the water sector, we love acronyms. So that really stands for the CWWA. And we are a group of practitioners that work in the Caribbean region in water and waste. And of course, water includes water supply, water resources, and the wastewater sector. And our job is really to advocate and lobby of the science and the practice and the engineering behind this sector and drive governments to really take this thing seriously. And a lot of our work as well is also public engagement. So I wear the hat of president. I assumed president in October of 2020, and I'll serve for 2 years as president. And of course, the other more contentious hat that I wear is I am the water sector specialist at the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Okay. So most of the conversation, obviously, and sort of like apropos, given what is currently in happening around the world, is you as the president of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. So, which is kind of like at the enterprise level, if we want to use enterprise risk management as the denominator for our conversation. So, since it's risk unfiltered, we tend to push it. Well, I tend to push the envelope, and then some of my colleagues who are listening will say, Ken, maybe, but we'll treat for that as it comes along. So, what is the mandate of CWWA? So, you mentioned you are a representative body.
Well, I mean, our membership are made up of professionals in the sector as well as utilities. And we also have private sector representatives that do work in the business of water and waste. So we try to, the association is a platform for all those people to come together, share ideas, talk, just collaborate. So in terms of the sway, we are, for the most part, water utilities. We work for water utilities. So the CWWA is that sort of central place where we all meet to discuss.
Okay. All right. So how long have you been president now?
So I've been president since October of 2020.
I see CWWA as an influencer in the water space. Yeah. How significant a role does CWW play in influencing the agility, the changes that are required in most of these, because they're very archaic, and of course there are exceptions, but so you may see processes or procedures that you'll probably then share with your membership, and then you will probably try and influence the water utilities. Yeah,
definitely a continuous work in progress. We have a number of tools that we use to influence, as you see. One of them, of course, is education and training. A lot of what we do is building capacity within the utilities, water and waste, to do certain specific, carry out specific tasks and activities. And we tend to do those training in areas that they need it, as well as we try to introduce sort of modernized ways of dealing with their issues. And we do that because we sit at a very high level. So we see the common problems that all the utilities face. And one of the ways that we see that is every year we bring together the ministers with responsibility for water in one forum and the ministers with responsibility for waste in another. And we try to, based on that and based on the feedback that we get from the ministers, we sort of tailor a program and a strategy that addresses some of those needs at the very basic or sort of grassroots levels with our membership.
So if you look at an improvement continuum, how is it being scaled? Is it climbing? Is it stagnant? The improvements you as the leader of CWA would like to see, are they going in the right trajectory?
Well, what we see is that there are some utilities that are way advanced of others. which is, should not be happening in such a small region like this. So definitely in terms of the improvement scale, I would say, so we've been meeting with the ministers of water for the last 16 years. The ministers of waste, a little bit more recent, about we're hitting 6 years this year. The improvement scale is definitely very slow.
Why though? Why? Okay. And so this is risk unfiltered. So we need to take the filter out of it. And let's be clear, because these utilities, given the current volatility and uncertainty in the environment, I don't think they have the luxury that they had 5-6 years of nothing. They do not have the luxury to go as they would like to go, because there's a probability and an impact scale, I believe, that isn't being looked at just yet. Yeah. So why is it that one or two is outperforming the others? Is it people? Is it process, or is it systems?
I think a lot of it has to do with the ecosystem that they operate within. But I think for the most part, and this goes for water and waste, it's expected to be run like a business, but business decisions aren't made in a lot of these utilities. And I think that's because there's confusion with, the notion that water is a human right versus, it is also an economic good. And it goes the same way for waste. I mean, for the most part, a lot of our countries are not treating waste as waste and not as a resource. And I mean, I think that a lot of the time, that the ecosystem that they operate within doesn't allow for that. So for the utilities that are doing well, you find that in terms of their governance structure and their ecosystem, it's way more mature than others. So they understand that there's certain business decisions that have to be made. There's a separation between, who regulates this utility and the shareholder, which in all of the cases are the state. And there's independence in how those decisions are made, and they're made a little bit more rigorously than in other countries. So, in my view, in my technical opinion, I think that is what makes the mark between the utilities that do well.
And the others, and I will call this entity, based on my research, Belize. I think they are one of the better performing water utility companies. Yes.
They are.
Why does one not require the subventions that the others can't live without? Why is that?
The instrument of comparing or using comparators is one of the tools that we use at the CWWA. So oftentimes in our meeting with the ministers, we show them, this is how you all compare against each other. And those are eye openers for them. But I think one of the shortfalls we have at CWWA is we tend to engage, of course, people that understand the sector and people who work in the sector. Whereas, water, these utilities are everybody's business. And when I talk about the ecosystem, it includes other agencies that influence what happens in water, like the Ministry of Finance in all of these countries. And we tend to not speak to those people. And I think maybe we need to continue evangelizing some more.
Yeah. Actually, so one of the things that popped out when you talk about ecosystem, and you look at the environment, the larger ecosystem. So what about biosecurity, diversity, climate change, border security, national security? How does CWA plan on aligning, integrating, if I could use that word, these other bodies into the ecosystem? Because you aren't, or you cannot, given what happened with the volcano, as an example, water and wastewater touches on all of these things, right? So are you now doing that? And how quickly can you align yourselves or integrate what's going on in those spaces with what you probably, by way of one of your mandates?
It's definitely a gap that we are continuing to fill, talking to other players. And I think, before COVID hit, the major sort of player outside of who we normally talk to was the tourism sector. Because of course, in a lot of these islands and the Caribbean, that's the sole source of income. And I mean, they are also very reliant on water. Some of them actually self-supply. and they understand, the importance of water. And I think that, when we look at the full water business, as you said, all the risks that you call at every point in the value chain of water, there are risks, and there are risks that really, for the most part, you cannot control as a utility and as an operator. So I think that we recognize that it's a gap, and associations just like us, but who represent different sectors, for example, the tourism sector, as I mentioned, or the agricultural sectors, and use that opportunity to find synergies in the work that we do.
Yeah. So here's my concern. Yesterday there was a boat ran aground off the coast of Sri Lanka carrying oil and petrochemicals. Can I say almost every member of CWWA has a desalination, uses seawater as part of their natural water supply?
Almost,
many of them.
Yeah, not all. Yeah.
Okay. So let's hypothesize. Let's do a little scenario analysis here. So talking about going back with the alignment with biosecurity, climate change. Let's pick on your home where you are now in Trinidad and Tobago. What is it? 25% of what's the percentage of the water supply comes from desalinated water?
Yeah, just 20%. Yeah.
20%. Okay, okay. Hypothetically, so there is, God forbid, there's a massive oil spill close to where the Salcott pulls from. What happens? How quickly can the Salcott then move around their operations so that oil spill doesn't impact the water supply of Trinidad and Tobago? So the Salcott, probably for Trinidad and Tobago and others, similar entities, needs to be part of that ecosystem we're talking about. So I'm raising that hypothetical to suggest Trinidad and Tobago is an oil-producing entity. So there are tankers back and forth. So again, what I'm trying to drill down and to evangelize on, those things, as far as I can ascertain, aren't really being considered. It's being thought of, but not operationalized or actioned.
Yeah.
Sarah. Yeah. So it goes to my question. That ecosystem needs to be broadened. Yeah. If you can't think it, you can't act on it. And the folks that you have to deal with, or CWWA has to deal with at the ministerial level, and some of the leaders in these institutions aren't necessarily thinking like that. Yeah. They're pigeonhole focus on getting water in pipes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this scenario that you described is a real event that has happened to us. We've had diesel spills in CRMA, which provides most of our water supply in the country. And I mean, for the most part, we scrambled, right? We're like, we're there running around like headless chickens out in fires. One of the opportunities that we have at the CWWA is that we are recognized as a responder in the event, a responder for water and sanitation and health and in hygiene. WASH, that's the other water acronym, in accordance to, as identified by the Caribbean Disaster Environment Management Agency and Emergency Management Agency, CWWA. So we have helped we help with responding to these type of events, the volcano being the most recent. So that's one of the sorts of tools in our armory. And that, I guess, puts us in a position to be able to say, hey, we see you respond, or we are all scrambling, because one of the things about the region is we pool our resources together when anything happens, a hurricane, a volcano eruption, anything, we pool our resources together. And I completely agree, and we had this discussion. It's an excellent idea, and it's something that we should operationalize yesterday.
Exactly, that's the point. Yesterday, so Sarah, this is the concern I have. So an object at rest stays at rest until it gets kicked in the ass. Newton's law of motion with Ken Hackshaw's little paraphrasing there. I know some folks don't sit down and think about outside their domain. You cannot just simply focus on putting a product out. You must focus on what can impact me putting that product out. And when I do put that product out, can I impact anyone else with that product? So we're talking risk management.
Right.
That said, what are your top 3, if you have to suggest 3 things that must be done across the water utilities, what would be those top 3 things? Not financing, because we know that's a given, but outside of funding, what are the top 3 things? If the minister says to you, Sarah, tell me 3 things that must be done now, what would be those 3 things?
Well, I would tell him, or I have said, water losses.
Right.
You're driving a car, you would never put gas in your car when you know that your gas tank has holes in it, right?
Right.
So no-brainer is water losses.
Right.
And there's a way to do that. I know that in terms of political expediency, you know, it is obviously what is going to impact the customer.
Right.
And that is really where the minister will be coming from. So in my view, and this is not just like my overall view, this is my technical view that is based on quantitative work. We need to look to tick off that box of water losses and use that recovered water to supply people with water.
Exactly.
The other thing will be governance. So I think that there is little to no accountability in how in the management of this sector, and I think that accountability, it starts with accountability and transparency, and I think they go hand in hand. So those are 2 things. That's one thing: accountability and transparency.
Right. So we put that under the governance structure.
Yes,
so that's
governance is that's the second one.
What would be the third one?
I mean, I think the third one is finding a way to really manage the upstream side of the water industry, because there's so many things that impact this water production, you know, things like agriculture, quarrying, just development, pollution. And we have not found a way to regulate, and this is not just water we're talking about here, we're talking land use, everything. Have not found a way to collaborate and really come together to regulate the environment for water resources.
Right. Okay, so then the third might come under legislation. So it's wastewater governance legislation. But let's pick up leaks, and it's an industry problem, meaning global for the most part. Okay, why? And you're a technical expert. What causes leaks?
Well, when I say water losses, it's not just physical leaks, right? It's basically the utilities. Yeah, they spend X amount of money. They produce X amount of water, and they're expected to get Y amount of revenue. And the losses are not getting revenue for that water. So it includes physical leaks.
And what are the other contributors to water
loss?
The
other contributor is what we call commercial losses. So 95% of the country is not metered.
Okay.
We're not billed based on how much we use, right? We're just billed.
All right. So let's take those 2 categories. So one is tangible, hard water loss. The other is the cost of and the revenue coming from water. Yes, the P&L of water. Okay. Why not just put in meters? Why? No, seriously. You'll piss some folks off for a while, but why not just put in meters? Put in the meters. What's the worst thing? Let's put risk management in this space. And I know there will always be pushback, political and otherwise, but let's think of this logically, financially and logically. What's the worst thing can happen in putting in meters? In metering homes, they're doing the same thing on the electricity side. Yeah? Why not just do it though?
Well, I think, and I mean, when you invite the minister to speak, I guess he will give you his side, his thinking. But I think that, obviously the priority in the Trinidad and Tobago water sector is getting water to people. And the question mark is, how does metering help with that, right? But for me, I see metering as an accountability tool for the utility and for the customer.
And the use of it,
So a lot of us complain that we don't get water when we say we get it, yet we pay this monthly bill or quarterly bill. So metering allows that check and balance between what we get versus what we don't get for the utility and for us. Yeah. So I think that's one of the major selling points of metering. I think as I said, the question really is how is metering going to get water to people? And my answer to that is that we have an organization that is managing water supply. How are they managing water supply when they are not measuring water supply? So, I mean, obviously, what happens in between? In the absence of no measurement, what do you do? How are you managing?
Yeah, well, actually, you could take that from soup to nuts. There's little data. There's very little data in many of these institutions, and I don't know if it's intentional or otherwise. But what we call it, this maxim, what gets measured gets managed. So if you don't want to be managed, you're not going to measure. Yeah, and it cannot be about PSI and water flow. Can't just be about that. That metering ties back into governance, because folks, it's going to be a difficult sell in Trinidad and Tobago, given what has been put in the public domain about what WASA has done, how it has operated, to now say to them, we're going to meter you. So that governance issue, that leadership issue, that performance issue must be addressed before you could then tell folks, okay, now we're going to meter you.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want to see the fuss that's going to be made while things are still being fixed.
Yeah.
Some decisions need to be made, because in the absence of decisions being made, and as you would well know, bad things continue to happen. And I dare say, given the environment, the global environment, there isn't that luxury of 5, 10, or even 3 years ago where we could take our time with these things.
Yeah.
If a bad event eventuates a week from now, what happens? Yeah, given all the inner rumblings and the fixings of things within the Water and Sewage Authority, and a critical event occurs that could impact the island of Trinidad and Tobago, on top of what is currently not being done or was supposed to be done, what happens then? Yeah. Okay. So we have identified those 3 top things.
You were talking about introducing the point about what happens if there's this major catastrophe. The question of what's the worst case scenario if we do it? And there are a couple of things. One is, how do you build public trust, as you said, as you're suggesting, which is important for just any intervention that the government wants to make in the water sector, and as building that public trust and confidence is important, and something that has to be done. The other thing is, there's a level of 2 things that happens on the downstream end of the value chain of water, and that's when it gets to the customer. And one of that is apathy. So there seems to be, this sort of, oh, that's how it is. We can do anything about it. And because of that, the second thing that happens is the households or the customers build their own resilience. So, we all of us have tanks. Some of us have 1 tank, some have 20. So we find a way to manage our own individual risk in our state, which if you talk to the utility is also a risk to them, because they don't know what happens when you're storing this water, So
exactly, and that has a cascading effect. So I think what we are agreeing to, without necessarily saying so, is that when you take leakages or water availability, governance, and legislation, what is CWWA under your leadership? What should you be doing that you might not now be doing?
We are trying to lobby at a very high level, and we have also been trying to train some of the utility representatives. I think one of the gaps that we have, or the things that we, as you said, we should be doing is probably just making more noise. But I think, I mean, obviously we try to, it's a regional association, right? And while we are headquartered in Trinidad, and we actually were established by an act of the Trinidad and Tobago Parliament, we represent the Caribbean. So, you know, a lot of what we do is try to do like hand-holding between utilities. So we work together with one of the great programs that we have, that we work together with the UN Habitat, is a water operators partnership, where the water operators have like a peer-to-peer relationship, and they learn from each other on certain things. So it goes back to, you know, not leaving anybody behind, any utilities behind. But one of the main things that we do is we show you where you are on the scale. So, you know, back to the issue of metering, Trinidad and Tobago is one of the countries, one of very few countries in the region that don't have metering. Most countries do have meters. So, you know, that's one of the areas we're falling.
But that becomes a chicken and egg thing, because if you don't fix the perception of the public on going back to, let's say, SOASA, then you'll never meter. So one has to come before the other.
Yes.
Yeah. The clock is against these entities. But when you look at emerging risks, which is something folks tend not to do. So the scenarios or the hypotheticals we were discussing, that needs to be part of the conversations within these utilities as they strategize and as they plan. And I don't know if that is being done as effectively as it should. So when you talk about legislation, so should legislation come before governance or before the fixing of the water issue, be it the P&L or the actual leakage? So what is your priority for the entities, for the water utilities? So if you identify those three, and let's speak specifically about, say, Trinidad and Tobago. Is Trinidad and Tobago water one of the worst performing water utilities in the Caribbean?
Yeah. It is very much behind.
A little while ago, you said they do the peer-to-peer and try to pull you along so no one left behind.
They never benefited from the peer-to-peer partnership. So I think lack of proactiveness from a management perspective. And I mean, that's really at the root of all the problems. And, you know, you asked me which one would I sequence?
Right.
And I would, based on the data, I would sequence the issue of water loss. Because if you look at how did we get here? How did we arrive at this problem of having water loss? Yes, it has to do with, you know, underinvestment and the infrastructure perspective. But a lot of it has to do with management. You know, have they been sounding the alarm to say, you know, this is an issue? Do they have data to support that this is an issue? And one of the peculiarities about the water sector, and this is why, you know, it tends to suffer compared to other utilities, is beside the fact that, you know, water is a human right, and we have to cater for, you know, everyone that needs water. But the other thing is that when something happens in another utility, for example, electricity, everybody feels it instantly. So you don't get electricity, you know, you have a nationwide blackout. But in the water sector, years and years of neglect, and then we're now starting to see the symptoms. So it's almost like a hidden problem that you don't see until it is explosive. And that's one of the challenges we have. So, you know, when you talk about being proactive and dealing with emerging risk, I think that can help us in this.
Oh, most definitely. So let's hypothesize even further. How does aging infrastructure become a problem? I oftentimes say that risk management starts with the individual. When you're at your house, in your home, you'll be looking at your appliances and stuff. So you will never let your refrigerator or your critical appliances get to the stage where it's not functioning. So you'll be probably inspecting it more often or cleaning it. There's a process in place, a procedure, a methodology, so it never gets to non-functioning. So aging infrastructure becoming a problem is because it was allowed to age. The uninspected always deteriorates.
Yeah.
So, and some folks used to know it's underground. I said, that was 20 years ago. There's technology now that could survey things to detect, potential for leakages. Where are the water utility companies in across the Caribbean? How are they moving to be not just proactive, but anticipatory? And what role is CWW playing? So here's my concern. If you think it, you can act on it. So modernizing the water utilities, their training must be modernized. Because practice makes perfect, but it does not make new. Analytics or data capture, risk management needs to be at the fore. To that point, Sarah, let me suggest something to you, and maybe that's where CWWA could play a part. In the last webinar that you guys hosted, I challenged the guy from Caribbean Development Bank. When folks, entities are coming for funding, add the efficacy of their risk processes to a criteria. In the absence of that, why are you just throwing water, no pun intended, throwing money away like that? Because if things aren't being fixed properly, issues and risk aren't being identified and addressed, if there's not plan so that new infrastructure doesn't become aging infrastructure, then why continue to lend them? What's your take on that?
One of our partners are the development banks, right?
Right.
So we work with them, we get funding from them to do some of the things. So I think we're in a good position to lobby that in their due diligence process, it should include risk management. I think one of the excellent things about the session that you did is it really got some of the utility practitioners, the employees thinking, like, am I doing everything that I should? I think what tends to happen is, as you saw, they tend to bunch up risk, this concept of risk with audit. They send their auditors to these sessions. I think that you definitely got some bells tinkering.
That's how you get an object to move. What gets measured gets managed. So that helps with the P&L. It helps with the governance side as well, Sarah. Demonstrate the efficacy or the effectiveness of your governance, of your measurement tools, your key performance indicators, because if they don't want to move in and of themselves, it has to come from an external force. And CWWA can be a great external force for that. What is your biggest headache as being president of CWWA?
Well, actually, just to close off what you mentioned before, you already have the business case. We've been dealing with COVID, and we are just responding to the volcano eruption. And then as much as I don't want, I'm not going to wish it to put goat mouth on it, but we have a hurricane season coming up, and almost every day we are part of a team that's responding to a hurricane. So we have the business case for why risk management is important, being proactive,
anticipatory. And so see that word you use, respond. When you think respond, meaning that's reactive. Right. So maybe prepare. And so hurricane in and of itself is not, this is me evangelizing, it's not a risk, it's a given. Impact is what you need to start managing. So and I think the weather experts are saying this might be one of the most active hurricane seasons in a bit. So what is CWWA doing by way of conversations, training, or whatever else you have in your toolkit to get these folks ready? And don't, for heaven's sakes, let them tell you, we have many hurricanes before. Experience in of itself is a risk. Because you are experiencing dealing with hurricanes, what if there's a variation, i.e. the Cat 5 that hit Bahamas? They were never prepared for a Cat 5. But what if there's a deviation from the norm?
I think this is one of the things that I continue to battle with is, we know the risks, fine. Maybe that's the easy part, But then, you know, how do we ensure that this plan that we have to deal with this risk or manage this risk is effective?
Governance.
The place, yeah.
People.
Yeah.
You gotta have. And to that point, let me ask you a question. I did a similar podcast with the head of impacts, and he said something to me that I knew, but it was never articulated as he articulated it. He said that it's easier to get funding after a disaster than it is to basically prevent a disaster from occurring. Do you concur from a water utility perspective?
Yeah, definitely. But I think there's a reason for that. And it's because we do not do a good job at measuring impact, right? So
impact. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Because, so for example, you know, I remember one time I was doing a paper and I was looking for information on what was the financial losses incurred by flooding. And that was finding
exactly
needle in a haystack. Yeah. And you would think, you know, this exists because you're bailing out people, you are giving them grants, and we do not collect that type of data. And I actually had a conversation this morning in my office with the executive director that is what we need. We need analytics. We need to show it is, I mean, data is what is behind that. And we don't.
Our decisions, forget the past, because we know that data wasn't driving decision making. It was politics and intuition. And so what can you do? And let's speak specifically about the water and wastewater in Trinidad and Tobago, because personal impact to you and your family. But that's how I remember having a training session with the leaders of that said water utility. And I said to them, many of you are not incentivized to fix the problem here, because many of you, I said there were 25 people in the room and there was about 345 years of experience together, 25 by 35. I said, many of you have one foot out the door. But I'm sure many of you, fortunately or unfortunately, don't have a second passport. So you have to live here. And you may have siblings, grandchildren. So think of the impact to them if what you're doing now fails.
Yeah.
That is how I was trying to incentivize these decision makers, given the mindset, the background, the training of the folks. And that doesn't take away from what their expertise are. Yeah. But as I would have said to you, and I mean this from a risk practitioner's perspective, experience in and of itself is a risk. So I always say lean in with your skill sets. Yeah. Experience is great, but you must bring something else. So if you're a baker for 30 years, but all you've been baking is bread, you could say you're not a baker, you're a bread maker for 30 years. So if I have you to make donuts and you can't make it, don't tell me you're a baker. Right? Actually, that's a good analogy. I need to write that down. You know, we talk about risk culture, and risk culture is your attitude and your behavior that forms how you treat and respond to certain things, specifically risks. Unless, and I know you would agree with this, unless you put or have measurements, when you do put the people in place to measure their performance, their attitude and behavior, it's going to be a recurring decimal with the crap that goes on. Yeah. And I've not seen, I'm not privy to anything, but nothing is in the public domain specifically. So it cannot be driven by just experience.
Yeah.
The guy, and you would have heard me say this, and I love to say this, and then I'll ask for you to give your final word, because I know those ladies are going to have some questions. So by way of experience, you know, I refer to it as the Aegis Smith syndrome. You know, the captain of this boat, you know, got promoted. And when he was asked why, he said, I have 30 years experience. I've never been in a shipwreck, nor have I ever seen one. 2 days later, he was the skipper of the Titanic. Takes rest one time. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, as you hinted, you know, is how I can make a difference in this sector. And I think, you know, in response to it is personalized. It is, and I think that could be from a personal perspective a little bit unhealthy. because I feel I have to cheat.
Maybe unfortunate as well, but that's reality.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, I have to change this thing, but then I tell myself, as part of my compartmentalization process, I tell myself that, you know, you are not the decision maker. Your job is to influence. As you said, your job is to push the envelope.
Right.
And
suggest and advise.
I advise and put the information out there and do it as proactively as you could. And I think that that's why I've jumped onto this bandwagon of risk management, because I realize that it is part of it is looking forward, right? So, you know, half of what I do is looking back, and then the other half should be being strategic. What is to come? So I definitely, it is personal, and I try. It is why I lose sleep, because I try to stay ahead of the game and really just advise, and I do it as frankly as possible. You know, any of my colleagues will tell you that I have no filter. But the thing is, it is important for me to communicate that, hey, you know, we're not headed down the right path. And one of the things is, you know, pushing this holistic sort of approach to effective risk management.
It helps in good decision making. It helps with accountability and transparency. And so with that being said, I have two of my colleagues here, Kellyanne and Natasha. Folks, I don't know if you have any questions for Ms. Govia before we sign off. Kelly?
Sure, I do. I was just wondering what conversations you all have been having about climate change. I know you would have mentioned that not everyone is involved in desalination. So what have you all been discussing with respect to this issue?
So what we've done at the CWWA is we actually have a regional strategic action plan for building climate resilience in the water utilities. And that is an excellent document that brings together all of the partners that are doing work relevant to the sector, not just water sector stakeholders, and trying to organize the way that they work to develop climate resilience and climate proof the water sector. So that's actual documentation, and we're rolling out certain projects. Most of what we do in the sector are aligned to that regional strategic action plan. And it has a climate lens, because I mean, as you recognize, climate is a great uncertainty in terms of what happening in the water sector, and we're feeling it. We're seeing it now. You know, we have very dry spells, very dry wet seasons, wet seasons. We're seeing the variability in weather patterns. And the irony is, at least for Trinidad, is that during the dry season, we have problems for water supply. And then during the wet season, we have problems for water supply. So just to tell you how resilient or not resilient our infrastructure is.
Is that document publicly available?
Yeah, it is. It's on our website.
Is it more than a it's more than a document? I mean, so does going back to Water and Sewage Authority, are they redeveloping a strategic plan inclusive of the larger ecosystem? So you're talking about climate change and the impact and what must be done or to ensure that it does not impact as significantly as it can in the absence of doing whatever their strategic plan. Are they working on a new strategic plan, or are they still operating with the one from way back when?
I just want to add on to Ken's question, because throughout the conversation, it was one of the things I was listening for. And you did speak to it coming down to the end. You just referenced the importance of being strategic in your thinking and thinking forward, being forward looking. So, you know, Ken's question was really where I was heading. Similarly, I think one of the reasons that it's been so difficult to get people to recognize how critical it is to elevate risk management is because risk management is really the flip side of strategy. When you start thinking ahead, you really start thinking about what ifs when you've identified your goal. And one of the reasons I think we have a tough time with risk management is because a lot of the people that we deal with and we have in decision-making roles are not as strategic as they might need to be. So it's one of the things that we have to do alongside building the risk management competencies is really building strategic competencies. So I was happy to hear you reference, you know, the importance of being strategic. And I'll just go ahead and let Ken finish his question and let you answer that, because that's where I was going.
Yeah, so do they have a realigned, redesigned, reimagined strategic plan? Yeah.
Well, I need to personalize it in some respect, and then I need to, as I said, compartmentalize and stop at where I could do, you know. But they don't have a revised strategic plan, and that is coming before. That will come after their transformation plan. But what is happening in terms of climate is we're now developing a climate water sector adaptation plan for climate change in Trinidad and Tobago. So that is specific to the water utility, and it will address the issue of you know, how climate change is going to affect the different operational regions.
Okay.
So yes. But I mean, on the point of being strategic, I don't see how it's possible to work any other way, particularly when you're dealing with a sector, because, you know, you have to, beside identifying what are your priorities, the next thing is how do you sequence those things.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the other side of, you know, identifying risk. So, you know, we have this sort of wish list of all the things that we have to do, but what is important? And what happens next.
Right. So it ought not be a wish list, but what matters most.
Yeah.
Right. And then you sequence it based on by way of impact. So that's where strategy and risk converges. Yeah. And so I use the word reimagine. It can be, if you think of the word revise, it means like taking what currently exists and tweaking. I'm going to say that it probably needs to be thrown out, which is what I've suggested many times to many entities, given COVID and the impact on economies and industries. So going forward, you know, if you're taking digital transformation and transformation, that wasn't on the to-do list for your prior stuff. A lot has to be changed. A lot must be changed. So it's going to be instructive and informative to see what comes out by way of strategic plan. And it, you know.
But it's good news that they don't have a strategic plan, because as you always say, you know, doing any sort of strategic document in the absence of a full deep dive into risk.
Well, thank you.
So,
my risk one. Yes. Kelly, Natasha, any more questions for Sarah before we send her off?
Yeah, I actually just push back a little bit on that last comment, because I think the risk management, like the strategy, is a living, ongoing, organic thing. And, you know, it's a sort of a chicken and egg situation, because any strategic plan will, by its own development, expose new risks, because the strategy is not, may not be, it often will not be to do the same thing that we did all the time. So by developing a new strategy, new risks will emerge out of the strategy. So we can't do the deep dive in risk management and say, okay, that's all the risks we have, and then do the strategy and say, okay, we're dealing with all these risks. We have to then do a risk analysis of the strategy itself.
That's where the alignment takes place. And you can tell, Sarah, that Natasha's expertise lies in the strategic side of it, in strategy development. So she's a consultant, a very good one in and of herself in that space. So when we are engaged, we bring the full kitchen cabinet.
This is my first podcast.
Cool. You did a fantastic job, though.
I've been talking to my girlfriends about doing a podcast because,
you know, I could go on talking to you for the next couple hours, because it's not very often I find someone who is not trained in the space that we are in, but not just gravitated, but have accepted, understood inculcated and wanting to practice it, and you speak it as though you've been living it. So I want to thank you for being part of Risk Unfiltered. The Caribbean Risk Management Academy is at your service when and where needed. Sarah, it's been great having you. It's a comfort again knowing that you are in the space that you're in. Sarah, thank you much, and be safe out there, eh?
Yes, you all have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.